Williamville Stories Part 2 Lynx Hunting by Stephen Crane. Short stories, literature. Lynx Hunting, Williamville Stories, Stephen Crane. Jimmy lounged about the dining room and watched his mother with large, serious eyes. Suddenly he said, "Ma, now can I borrow Pa's gun?" She was overcome with the feminine horror, which is able to mistake preliminary words for the full accomplishment of the dread thing. "Why, Jimmy!" she cried. "Of all wonders, your father gun? No, indeed you can't." He was fairly well crushed, but he managed to mutter sullenly, "Well, Willie Dalzell, he's got a gun." In reality, his heart had previously been beaten with such a tumult, he had himself been so impressed with the daring and sin of his request, that he was glad that all was over now, and his mother could do very little farther harm to his sensibilities, but had been influenced into the venture by larger boys. "Huh?" the Dalzell urchin had said. "Your father's got a gun, hasn't he? Well, why don't you bring that?" Puffing himself, Jimmy had replied, "Well, I can if I want to." It was a black lie, but really the Dalzell boy was too outrageous with his eternal bill posting about the gun, which a beaming uncle had entrusted to him. Its possession made him superior in manfulness to most boys in the neighbourhood, or at least they enviously conceded him such position, but he was so overbearing and stuffed the fact, his treasure, so relentlessly down their throats, that on this occasion the miserable Jimmy had lied as naturally as most animals swim. Willie Dalzell had not been checkmated, for he had instantly retorted, "Why don't you get it then?" "Well, I can if I want to." "Well, get it then." "Well, I can if I want to." Thereupon Jimmy had paced away with great airs of surety as far as the door of his home, where his manner changed to one of tremulous misgiving as it came upon him to address his mother in the dining room. There had happened that which had happened when Jimmy returned to his two distinguished companions. He was blown out with a singular pomposity. He spoke those noble words, "Oh, well, I guess I don't want to take the gun out today." They had been watching him with gleaming ferret eyes, and they detected his falsity at once. They challenged him with shouted gibes, but it was not in the rules for the conduct of boys that one should admit anything whatsoever, and so Jimmy, backed into an ethical corner, lied as stupidly and desperately, as hopelessly as ever lone savage fights when surrounded at last in his jungle. Such accusations were never known to come to any point, for the reason that the number and kind of denials always equalled or exceeded the number of accusations, and no boy was ever brought really to book for these misdeeds. In the end they went off together, while Dalzell, with his gun, being a trifle in advance and discoursing upon his various works, they passed along a maple-lined avenue, a highway common to boys bound for that free land of hills and woods in which they lived. In some part, their romance of the moment, whether it was of Indians, miners, smugglers, soldiers, or outlaws, the paths were their paths, and much was known to them of the secrets of the dark green hemlock thickets, the wastes of sweet fern and huckleberry, the cliffs of gaunt blue stone with the sumach burning red at their feet. Each boy had, I am sure, a conviction that some day the wilderness was to give forth to him a marvellous secret. They felt that the hills and the forest knew much, and they heard a voice of it in the silence. It was vague, thrilling, fearful, and altogether fabulous. The grown folk seemed to regard these wastes merely as so much distance between one place and another place, or as a rabbit cover, or as a district to be judged according to the value of the timber. But to the boys it spoke some great inspiring word, which they knew even as those who pace the shore know the enigmatic speech of the surf. In the meantime they lived there in season lives of ringing adventure by dint of imagination. The boys left the avenue, skirted hastily through some private grounds, climbed a fence, and entered the thickets. It happened that at school the previous day Willie Dalzell had been forced to read and acquire in some part a solemn description of a lynx. The meagre information thrust upon him had caused him grimaces of suffering, but now he said suddenly, "I'm going to shoot a lynx." The other boys admired this statement, but they were silent for a time. Finally Jimmy said meekly, "What's a lynx?" He had endured his ignorance as long as he was able. The Dalzell boy mocked him. "Why don't you know what a lynx is?" "A lynx? Why, a lynx is an animal, something like a cat. It's got great big green eyes, and it sits on the limb of a tree, and just glares at you, and a pretty bad animal, I tell you. Why, when I—" "Huh?" said the third boy. "Where'd you see a lynx?" Oh, I've seen plenty of 'em. I bet you'd be scared of 'em if you seen one of 'em once. Jimmy and the other boy once each demanded, how do you know I would? They penetrated deeper into the wood. They climbed the rocky zigzag path, which led them at times where with their hands, they could almost touch the tops of giant pines. The grey cliffs sprang sheer toward the sky. Willie Dalzell babbled with his impossible lynx, and they stalked the mountainside like Kamoy hunters, although no noise of bird or beast-stroke. The stillness of the hill below from Williamville was spread out somewhat like a cheap green and black lithograph of the time, a bird's eye view of the Williamville NY. In the end, the boys reached the top mountain and scouted off among wild and desolate ridges. They were burning with the desire to slay large animals. They fought continually of elephants, lions, tigers, crocodiles. They discoursed upon their immaculate conduct in case such monsters confronted them, and they all lied carefully about their courage. The breeze was heavy with the smell of sweet fern. The pines and hemlocks sighed as they waved their branches. In the hollows, the leaves of the laurels were lacquered where the sunlight found them. No matter the weather, it would be impossible to long continue an expedition of this kind without a fire, and presently they built one, snapping down for fuel the brittle underbranches of the pines. About this fire they were willed to conduct a sort of play, the Dalzell boy taking the part of a bandit chief, and the other boys being with his trusty lieutenants. They stalked to and fro, long-strided, stern, yet devil-may-care, three terrible little figures. Jimmy had an uncle who made game of him whenever he caught him in this kind of play, and often his uncle quoted derisively the following classic: once aboard the lugger, Bill and the girl is mine. Now to burn the chateau and destroy all evidence of our crime, but harkee, Bill, no violence. Whirling abruptly, he addressed these dramatic words to his comrades. They were impressed. They decided at once to be smugglers, and in the most ribald fashion they talked carrying off young women. At last they continued their march through the woods. The smuggling motive was now grafted fantastically upon the original lynx idea, which Willie Dalzell refused to abandon at any price. Once they came upon an innocent bird who happened to be looking another way at the time. After a great deal of manoeuvring and big words, Willie Dalzell reared his fowling piece and blew this poor thing into a mere rag of wet feathers, of which he was proud. Afterward, the other big boy had a turn at another bird. Then it was plainly Jimmy's chance. The two others had, of course, some thought of cheating him out of the chance, but of a truth he was timid to explode such a thunderous weapon, and as soon as they detected this fear, they simply overbore him and made it clearly understood that if he refused to shoot, he would lose his caste, his scalp lock, his gutty, his honour,